So I'm going to go ahead and get that recording. Okay, so yeah, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Whitney Gurman, and this series is Turn to One Another. And it's, a really informal series with a little agenda other than just to connect and foster some belonging during this time of what feels like anxious and isolating. And so we just wanted to offer the skills that we have and the relationship that we've built to contribute to the community in some way during this time. And so that's what it's all about today. I'll let Johnny introduce himself, and then I'll just explain some of the features in Zoom that you can use throughout the conversation today.
Definitely. So my name is Johnny Jackson. Whitney and I actually we've been working together, Whitney, 2.5 years, something like that, in different projects. Something.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. I live in Marion, Ohio. I'm from Marion, but I just moved back to Marion a couple years ago. I lived in Korea for about 4 years. I taught at Miami University. I've kind of like made my route around a bit. Today, you can see in my background back here, I'm in Wakanda, an Afrofuturist land in East Africa that's fictitious, but also very real, maybe, if we all get the resources that we need, of course. So um, how would I identify myself? I would say that I am a caring person. I also am an Afrofuturist, thinking that there are going to be Black people in the future, and people of color, and poor people, and queer people, and people of all different backgrounds and abilities and disabilities and that type of thing. So this is kind of like Whitney and I's offering of turning to each other. We already do this one to one. So we always ask that question, like, how can we build this in fractals? Like citing Adrienne Marie Brown's work and saying that, if we can build relationship pedagogy one to one, maybe we can build it out into other spaces in our work. So this is our offering, and I'm so excited and overwhelmed and just anxious to be here with you all.
yeah, thank you to everyone that participated today and joined. And if some people come and go, that's totally fine. But so my role within OSU Extension is I'm an extension educator. And so OSU, you can think of that extension as the outreach and engagement arm of the university. We are a land grant institution, and so we were built on this premise of having community education. And a lot of our foundation is in agriculture, because when the land grant was established, agriculture was a great need. And so a lot of the examples that I give are kind of rooted in agriculture. But I'm also trained as a social worker. And so I went to the University of Michigan, and every assignment we were given, how do we view this through the lens of privilege, oppression, diversity, and social justice? And so that's really just informed my thinking, as well as how do we just have spaces like this to exist and feel what's happening to and around us without always having an answer. Especially right now, it just feels like information overload. And then once you do have time to feel, it's, well, here's how to make the feeling go away. Practice yoga or do this or that, go outside. And those things are helpful, but sometimes it's okay to just hold space to identify what we're feeling. And I think community is our most important resource. And so that's what we're going to cultivate today.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a great point, Whitney. I always love when you talk about that, is this idea of holding space with each other and building community. I just entered a new role as diversity and equity supervisor for Marion City Schools. Shout out to some of my people there. Okay, Lizzie, I see you. I see you also. Where did she go? Where did Jenna go? Okay, but Jenna and Lizzie are also teachers in Marion City Schools. Marion City Schools is, we're a public school and one of a very big entity when it comes to public education here in Marion County and Marion City, particularly. And I'm excited in my role because I get a chance to work with administrators, I get a chance to work with teachers, and I get a chance to work with students. And like broadening our way of thinking about social justice, equity, and inclusion in different ways. So yeah, I'm excited about my role and our both
Yeah.
our personal and professional relationships that Whitney have are kind of entangled in some of the work that I've helped do at OSU Extension as a land grant institution. And then also at Marion City Schools as we pursue this journey around equity.
Absolutely. So for just a few moments, I'm going to share my screen, and I just want to show this feeling wheel. And I know you might have to like turn your head and look upside down, and maybe you've already seen this before, but I just want to take some moments to breathe and look at the wheel and notice what you might be feeling right now in this moment. And you can say this to yourself inside. You can share a feeling in the chat box. But I just want to make sure we have space to feel all the feelings that are coming to us in this moment.
How about everything on the wheel?
Yeah.
At times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit more about that, Miss Judith May?
You know, I think this is a crazy time, unprecedented. No one would ever have imagined that this would happen. So I think that, like, in a single day, I go through so many emotions, you know, like sometimes I'm okay. And then, you know, our kids live in Columbus and have a business, and then a little thing goes wrong. And then I'm in it on another spectrum, you know? So I think in a day, maybe when the news is on, maybe we start out really good. Like I get up and I meditate. I'm a yoga teacher and I do all these self-care things, but then you turn on the news and it's just so dramatic and scary. And then it shifts your mood, and, you know, always looking for things to try to remind myself that everything is okay and will be okay. But I just feel like looking at that wheel, probably a lot of us go through, maybe not all of those emotions in a day. That's a lot, but I'm sure more than one of those in a day.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that.
I relate to that so much, thinking about like 2 o'clock and, you know, the governor is going to speak, and the anxiety that I feel around that hour, and afterwards, like trying to process all that information. I'll say the sun has helped tremendously.
Oh, so much.
Yeah, I feel more in that yellow green than I felt in the last week.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that you're saying too, especially you, Aunt Judy, just going back through so many different emotions in the span of one day. Like for example, today it took me 2.5 hours to get out of bed. I just wasn't feeling motivated. But now, all of your faces and having the opportunity to talk with other humans other than the one human that lives with me. He's a great guy, but it's nice to see other faces too. It's making me feel a lot more hopeful.
Thank you for sharing. I know for me, I was thinking about how these things, like the anger that I felt like at the way that people are being treated. I've been just really talking to a lot of friends who are deeply working class friends, and them being in this space of furlough or being in a space of not knowing if they're going to be safe going to work, and just kind of holding space with them and listening. So that I get like outraged at the treatment of people and also the treatment of myself. So I think that's one of the places that I've been at right now, and really trying to work through those feelings.
Gage added in the chat box that he feels sadness, peaceful, thankful. He's all over the wheel. And Dr. Taylor said, yes, the sun. And I hope everyone is getting outside to enjoy it.
I think for me, I'm trying hard to stay in the like green blue spectrum, but so I'm 22. I live in Columbus. I work in Marion City, and my family's here in Cleveland. So for me, it's been, I mean, it's hard being away from my kids, but it's also given me an opportunity to come home and be with family. And I think this whole experience has almost humbled us as a world in a sense, and made us really stop and think, what are other people dealing with? Like suddenly it's not just all about us, it's your actions are truly affecting other people. And I think that there's just a piece of humbleness in that. And I kind of like, I hope that when this is all said and done, that we can still remain humble and friendly and kind, not just to the person that lives next door to us, but to people all over the world. And kind of like Johnny said, like that inclusion piece and like how we treat people daily, I hope will drastically change like when this is all over.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think that it's so amazing that it's given us an opportunity to practice things. Practice, as you were saying, Lizzie, practice kindness, practice being in community with multiple communities that we're a part of. And I think that's something connecting to Whitney is that we've thought about is how do we connect to multiple communities as we do this work around turning to one another. Did anyone else have anything else that they wanted to share? I see that Miss Tina Barnes has just joined us. Hello.
I'm learning how to use this thing.
Maybe I could, if I could just make a comment about that wheel of words. I think that's really impactful when we can concretely describe what it is that we're feeling. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, so I have a 15-year-old and she says, "Mom, I'm so stressed out." And if we can't identify with words what it is that we're feeling, then we can't describe how they're making us feel, and we can't find solutions. Maybe there isn't one. If any of you practice the tenets of mindfulness, sometimes we just sit in what we feel and just try to observe like how our body feels, where our mind takes us. I know for me, I love to fix problems. And there's a very much a sense of being out of control with all of this. So I love tools like the word wheel, and that's used a lot in emotional intelligence work, to just, so when you're starting to feel some of those words, find the one that really, really speaks to you, and just notice your body and how that's making you feel. I think that's super important, is just that awareness piece. So I challenge her, don't say stressed, because we can't talk about stress. Let's find a different word for how you're feeling.
And thank you for sharing that, Erica. Leo actually popped in and said, it helps me to describe the feeling in a physical way, where it is in my body. And I think that as Erica was speaking, I was actually doing, as I've kind of learned a lot, is a body scan. Like where am I feeling like joy, and where am I feeling like tightness type of things in my body? So it is very helpful to kind of be able to identify those feelings, as Erica is saying, like being able to kind of talk about those, but also like sometimes we don't have words for them yet. It's like practicing on finding the language is one of the pieces, and practicing on scanning our body and understanding where we're coming from and where we're going in a way. Do you want to hop in?
Yeah, I love what you said, Erica, and I can send you all a file, maybe through email, or we can post it on the blog, because this is something I do with my daughter every day. She's 6, so this wheel is really overwhelming and she can't read all the words, but we have a chart of maybe 30 feelings that she picks out a few that speak to her during the day. And this is a tool that you can use with your own children or children that you care for, or students. So I'll make sure to distribute that. And then just want to reiterate, yes, the body scan, and having students, and this can be done virtually like we're doing in the space now, of just take a moment and describe what's going on with your body, pay attention, what's in your head and your shoulders and your back, and just taking that mindful time. might be a tool to some of the teachers and parents on the call.
Mm-hmm. So do we want to do some storytelling? Yeah, so we want to break into a little bit of storytelling, Whitney.
Yeah.
That's one of the pieces that we do a lot is we talk about storytellers telling as medicine, as being able to kind of heal with each other for our communities and for ourselves. Miss Tina Barnes asked, can we email that to her? And we can email all of these things out to make sure that people get access to those things. So in preparing today, Whitney and I were really thinking about, like, how do we do storytelling as a way to kind of turn to each other, listen to each other, and be in community with one another. So we basically were just writing in a way that we can write through and create, as we say, in a time of kind of like chaos, that type of thing. I don't know, Whitney, would you like to present a little bit of your story first, or do you want me to go? How would you like to do this?
Yeah, so I think storytelling, we talk about story-based strategy and like how can stories create social change and cultivate and embody all these values that we want to see in the world. And for me, writing is the way I process so much what's going inside of me. And so yesterday, I don't know, like what day is it? Just sat down and I shared this Google Doc with Johnny. I said, I just need to like have someone to share with, to process with. And I kind of wrote this piece about this time of panic and uncertainty and just started asking questions about, what would make it possible to activate something new in society, and what kind of alteration does a new life call for, and what do we owe one another? And in the last couple of years that Johnny and I have been working together, he's introduced me to Afrofuturism, and it's really been a source of comfort to me in uncertain times, and informed a lot of the work that I do around agriculture, actually. So there's this story in this book about great-great-grandmothers in West Africa that witnessed kidnapping and disappearance of the members of their community. We know the story of slave ships and colonization, but the lesser known stories are the hopeful ones, and how during the slave ships, as assurance for an uncertain future, they began practicing braiding, and they would braid rice and okra and seeds into one another's hair. And that gives me chills to think about, because they had the audacity to hope for a future on soil. And those practices, we still see now in present day, and it's through this African wisdom that helps us reimagine ways to reach for each other. And how do we handle conflict and make decisions, eat and love and grieve and play with one another? Our friend who couldn't join the call today, Primrose, always talks about Ubuntu, which means I am because we are, and having that emphasis on humanity towards others. And so I was just like thinking about belonging and what Ubuntu means in this time that we're all being challenged, and we're all being asked to experiment towards different solutions and different ways of doing things. And it's increased our interdependence on one another. And that's really contrary to what we've been conditioned to do. A month ago, we weren't really having these conversations as a collective. And some measures that are being introduced we thought were impossible, like ensuring basic income for everyone. And you've seen the pictures of the environment and how it's improving. And, now we're seeing organizations try to do a better job balancing work and family. And so it's really inspiring time, even though there's a lot of despair. And so in this article that I'll share with you really talks about that hope is our strategy and Ubuntu is the way, and it's how others have gotten free. It's how Indigenous people have formed alliances with farmers, and how migrants have resisted border imperialism. And I love this quote in this book called Joyful Militancy. It's about love. It's about reinventing how we love each other and knowing our solidarity is love and collaboration is love. So how do we start that in our own communities? How do we build foundations for love, and how do we create beautiful movements even while we're apart? How do we solve the local problems? And so I just wanted to reflect on that and share it with others and begin healing myself, and hopefully that healing can heal outward.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing all of that, Whitney. And I think that we should hold space with your story, because I think that storytelling a lot of times can be medicine towards relationship building. And maybe we can allow people to even engage you with some questions or commentary or anything. You use some words in there that people may have their first interaction with, or you said some things in there that were kind of like, oh wow, that hit and stood up. Like, for example, when you talked about joyful militancy and this idea of love as a praxis and as an entering way of being in community with people. So does anybody have any like questions or comments or things that Whitney might have said that kind of stood out to them? And you can put it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and say it.
Well, I think your part about hope is very important. I'm Ann Keller. I'm Liz's mom. I'm a kindergarten teacher in Lorraine City Schools, still under CEO takeover, by the way. Anyway, the part about hope sometimes is hard for our kids, because being a kindergarten teacher, Liz helped me get onto Class Dojo, and I had a child, one of my kids, Ezekiel, excuse me. He was very excited to tell me that he had lost his first tooth. Mm. And he was also sort of sad because he realized that his birthday was in April. When we left, I put all the April calendar up because we weren't supposed to come back till after spring break, and he saw his little birthday candle up on a cake. And he became very sad because he said he wasn't going to be with me to share his first tooth coming out in his birthday. And I instantly, as the one lady said, I try to fix things right away. And I'm like, oh, honey, I'm going to give Mrs. Keller's going to give you a big hug when I see you. And we're going to have a birthday party for everybody that did, because we had like 6 April birthdays for some reason. I said, we're all going to have a big birthday party. And I tried to fix it right away. But then I stop and think, because my kindergartners don't have a real good understanding of time. Like, we're all saying we don't even know what day it is. My kids don't understand time. And so I think a really good thing, as I'm trying to work on, is make things so that they can understand a time reference for them. Good job.
Yeah, I love that suggestion. And that's helpful to me, even as a parent. My daughter's in kindergarten. So how do we how do we give people hope? But when time is so unknown right now, we don't have an end. It can be hard to be hopeful. We don't know what we're looking forward to yet.
Mm-hmm. I like that point about time, because so much of our time resource, because it is a resource that we can use and we can spend with each other, that time thing is very relational. Like the amount of time that we can come in contact with each other is so important. I did want to point out that we have a couple things, and time is so weird right now. That's so true, Erica. Time is very weird right now. How we spend it and how we don't get to spend it with each other, maybe how to do community in a different way. But Leo Taylor has a very good point, is worrying about anti-Asian bias. And I think that that's so key. And I've been having conversations with different people about that. And maybe we can circle back to that conversation. Because I know that one of my friends on the call is Hannah, and Hannah and I have wrote about Afro-Asian futures and how in different communities, how we can combat racism, whether it's anti-Black racism or anti-Asian racism, how we can work together to work against that. And our president being particularly one of the ones that has named it the Chinese flu versus what the World Health Organization has said is COVID-19, is such a more important cultural moment for us to really think about how do we name things. Are there other commentaries or conversations that people wanted to have around Whitney's story as well too?
I think the idea of like sharing these stories of hope is like extremely powerful, kind of like you talked about. I know like I teach first grade, so story time is like the best part of the day for them. So like sharing the stories of people doing good, and I've been trying to share those things on Facebook and stuff. And even though my kids aren't seeing them, like I hope that if we do get to hopefully go back to school, when we go back to school, we can share those stories with them, because I feel like there's so much going on in the world right now that looks negative, but we need to be the people to show kids that there's positive too. So I appreciate you sharing a story of hope instead of like a story of disaster.
And I will ask, thank you for sharing that, Lizzie. Leo, could you share, you're going to be leading, it seems like, a public online forum. Will you share that information with us just in case some of our members would like to be in that community to kind of talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, it's still in the formation process. I am working with OPAL, which is a professional organization for Asian women in Ohio. A couple of women in that organization are interested in co-facilitating an online forum. Also working with the Multicultural Center at Ohio State to basically do this, like just come together, share space, voice concerns, but also invite people to take action and give them tools for doing so, direction for doing so. There was a letter that was signed and is being sent to local leaders and officials to take a stand against anti-Asian bias. I'm concerned about not only how people are experiencing this now, but also what happens, and as, by the way, I work at OSU, what happens when we reconvene in the fall? What are the long-term implications for our faculty, staff, and students as we move forward after this crisis? So that'll be publicized on Facebook. It will be sent out throughout the OSU community, and I want it to be as wide as possible. I'll be able to accommodate up to 500 people. Maybe I can get that increased to 1,000. So yes, please stay tuned.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And Gage, if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself, the proverb that you shared with me that is so close to Ubuntu, but it's a little different. I loved that when you shared with me like that last night. That really gave me another perspective.
Yeah, so a little backstory. So I spent 3 semesters of my undergrad in a rural farming community in West Africa in Ghana. The Benue people, they would always share oral stories through extension practices, through their community engagement while we were teaching youth and adults alike. And either at the beginning or at the end of all of their oral stories, they would share, "I belong, therefore I am," to give an intentional place for people in the community to express themselves freely, and really to give peace and humanity within the group. So I shared that with Whitney yesterday because it's really similar to the Ubuntu philosophy.
Wow, powerful. That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Definitely. Are there other reactions?
I was just thinking in terms of, I tend to be a person who believes that things happen for a reason, and we don't always understand in that moment why things are happening.
Mm-hmm.
To try to find the silver lining in all of this, and every day I've been able to find something. But I think it's whether it be in our own individual families, our communities, the world in general, it's almost like we had to hit the reset button and do some soul searching to say, how am I currently continuing my life? And are there some changes that I can make? And so I think that reset button, because of COVID-19, has been pushed. And so, finding other ways to connect with people. I know sometimes we get caught up in our busy days, and over the last couple to friends who live all over the country, people that I've not been in contact with, just to say, hey, I'm thinking about you. How are you doing? When they respond in such a positive way, that lifts me up. And I know that we've both been lifted up. Different things that we're doing here in our family. We've played board games. In a while, in too long. We're baking together as a family, reaching out to neighbors and other things. So, things are very, very difficult for many people. But there are also so many positive things that I think are coming from this. And like Lizzie, once this is all over, I hope we can continue to maintain the changes, the positive changes that all of us are bringing into our lives right now.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Sounds like there's been a lot of change in the social relationships and are bringing us closer with one another because, we spend our time on so many different things. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Leslie.
Leslie also added in the chat box that they're doing gratitude chains at home. So each day they're writing something we liked about the day, and then they're adding that to a chain, which I think is a really good idea. And another tool that I think I'll implement with my family and my child. And then Leo talks about reframing from what we can't do to what the crisis makes possible. So, that really speaks to me because that's what futurism is all about is, we've been told for so long these things are impossible. We've had to live in the imagination of someone else's reality. And now we have the power to design what's next. So that I really like that comment. And then Tina just added, I agree, this time in our lives has made everyone look at how we relate to each other, from our families to our friends. We have had to use our devices for more than games. I myself have learned different ways to reach out to friends and family. We live in the possible. That's good.
That's amazing. Well, I want to share a story. Like Whitney, actually, my story is actually a reaction to Whitney's story. It was so powerful, and her kind of like coming up with thinking about the large-scale Afrofuturism and imagining a future more possible. And I just kind of talked a little bit about, I live here in Marion, Ohio, and this land is formerly First Nations Shawnee land that was taken from people a long time ago in a way of not giving it back, but imagining settlers to come for multiple futures and multiple centuries. Through broken treaties and genocide and other forms of colonial projects, I think this land has been captured. And I come from people who were also captured, taken from their lands, brought here to this community, what we call America, or what some communities call Turtle Island, to not be human. It's actually written in the laws and the codes for us not to be human in a lot of ways. So my mother's mother and my grandmother both come from Mississippi, and they moved to Ohio for better economical and social power relationships. So did also my father's father, and my father's grandfather came from Georgia. So my African-American ancestors have very deep roots in the South. And those deep Southern roots are ones that think about community as a time orientation and relationship with one another. They think about working poor, working class, middle class people. They think about queer people. They think about able-bodied people or unable-bodied people. We think about people that are in our families that have different ways of what we call just being in the world. When I think about my mother's story, which is so much attached to my story, is there is a fine line between danger and wonder in her childhood, picking pecans off of trees, running through fields, and also running alongside rivers in her hometown of Hollandale, Mississippi. Alongside this were also adult white folks who would call them nasty names and make them move off the sidewalks. So these stories are what we call survival stories in our community. I'm happy that my mother's story of survival alongside being terrorized just because of the color of her skin kind of opens me up to sit and hold space with people who are in the world. So when Brother Taylor talks to us, Dr. Taylor talks to us about how anti-Asian bias is in the world, we have to sit in a way of wonder of how we can create a wholeness with each other that is more beautiful, but also the danger that some of our Asian community members, Asian American community members are in. So kind of like pulling in that and opening and holding space. I think of like Asada Shakur when she reminds us that when we talk about Black Pride movements, it's important for empowering people of African descent all over the world and shedding what we say a positive light, or as Leslie Berry just told us, finding that silver lining in the storm that is over us. So whether we're political or economic or psychological refugees, there's a certain type of liberation that we could have with one another and a powerful relationship that we can come in with each other. I think about also my father. His name is Johnny Jackson, my namesake, or I'm his namesake, I guess I can say. And one of his most recent letters from prison, he said, "I hope all is well with you. Remember how much I love you. I hope it makes you smile to know that no matter what, I love you. Nothing in this life will ever change that." And I think that that's so powerful when we think about our relationship with one another, is like how important it is that we can hold space with one another and have the endurance of love with one another. So that's my real story as medicine type of thing.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
It means so much to hear personal stories. Does anyone want to share a reaction or thought that came to mind from hearing Johnny's story?
So my thought with the quotes that Whitney shared and the stories of, you know, when we think about that history of weaving seeds into people's braids, and then, you know, Johnny's story of his mom being more recent times, that we all have those survival stories, but we don't learn or know of them in the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
We now read these things from history of like, you know, wow, the strength or the, you know, whatever it is people brought to the table to create our history. And now, you know, whether it's decades later, we now know names or we know their stories. And certainly by kind of using some of these techniques, that if we could raise up the stories right now of the people in the struggle, where it is, that we can learn from one another in real time, as well as that history from, you know, family members or historical figures and stuff like that. So I just, to me, kind of saw that whole linear span of, you know, what Whitney had kind of shared even in her writings. And thank you, Johnny, for, I mean, that's your story, but it's your family story. It's, you know, it's those who are before you. I really appreciate kind of seeing that over the time span.
Definitely. Thank you.
I am so glad you shared that, Patrice, because Patrice is in the same position I'm in Lucas County, and I did not plant her to be part of this webinar, but it is perfect because that's kind of where we're want to go, is how can we start telling more stories? You know, I wrote something and then underneath it, Johnny's wrote something. So we have this Google Doc started that if others want to contribute, I can share the link, and maybe this is a way that we begin a collection.
Yes, Tina, we have that story happening there right now, right? What, 20 or 30 years from now, the kids will ask, where were you and what were you doing? And what are we going to tell them?
Yeah, and elevating the resiliency, you know, what happened here right now in this space on this Zoom call, and then how that got amplified. And I don't know. It's all very inspiring to me. I'll put the Google Doc so that if anyone else wants to contribute to it, you can, and you can share this widely.
Definitely.
Are there others that had thoughts come to mind, or maybe saw the connection between our stories, or maybe it was something separate that came from Johnny's story that really resonated with you?
I did want to think about Whitney. You mentioned in your story that you wrote, which I hope that we can share. You asked this question about what do we owe each other, and I think that's such a powerful question to ask. What do we owe each other in such a time of chaos? And I think that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. asked the question like, are we going to choose community or chaos in a time of, utter crisis? So I was kind of like thinking about that, excuse me, as we kind of like sit with each other. Storytelling is healing, as Jenna just remarked. I think that's so important. But I've been thinking about this a lot too lately, is how can I be both grateful with people and also graceful with people? Give people a lot of grace, because there's so many things that we're going to make mistakes on in our work. I'm not talking about like intentional homophobia or sexism or racism. I'm talking about giving people time to work with each other during like utter like confusion type of things. So that's one of the things I really keep thinking particularly about.
Yeah, and I did not come up with that question. That's from a philosophy book of what we owe each other. But I love what you're speaking to. It's, in the same book that I referenced before, Joyful Militancy, it talks about rigid radicalism and all this anxious posturing and being the one to break the news story on social media and constant virtue signaling. And we see this in social justice spaces, we see this in other spaces, and in this time of chaos, I think everyone's kind of rushing to be the one with the solution. And how do we hold grace for one another and kind of say what you're saying is be gentle. And Erica added that too in the chat box, that we certainly owe each other grace and patience. Leo says many people are flailing around trying to figure this out, and there's an element of whiplash because the changes happen extremely quickly. That is so true.
That's so true. That's so true. And I've heard that from many of my friends in higher education and also my friends in K-12, is that the degree to which things are coming top down and saying, we need to get things online tonight. We need to get things online tomorrow. And it's like, okay, well, what are my core competencies in kind of doing that type of work, and giving people a space enough to understand, like, we're going to get there, but please give some grace time to get there. Because there is, as I know, Whitney, you were saying earlier, there is a digital divide in certain communities. There's a technology divide that we need to be mindful of as we're working with each other and trying to come together and work. Yeah, that's such a good point, Hannah, is, breathing. Breathing is like a very important possibility. So we have like 12 minutes left. And do we want to open up time to have commentary, have questions, and that type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has anything else to share, and you can also use this time if there's a resource, like how Dr. Taylor shared of resources that's coming. If you know of any resources that are there to give mutual aid to other people, please, share them. We can post anything online, and we'll make sure that everyone on the call gets the materials that we referenced today. So Tina asked how often we're going to do this. This little series will be every Thursday for 3 weeks. So today was our first week. That gets us, let's see, April 9th. That's so wild. It's April almost. So April 9th will be our last one. Unless there's interest in other people still coming together, we can still hold this meeting room space and others can contribute and facilitate too.
Definitely. And Dr. Taylor, you had another event that you wanted to speak about a little bit?
Yeah, I'm also planning another webinar. This will be more of a presentation, but also facilitated discussion on how to parent during this time so that we're not raising a generation of germaphobes, agoraphobes, hypochondriacs, children with OCD. So I'm reaching out to folks. There's an embedded counselor in my college, but he seems a bit overwhelmed, and I want to find somebody who specializes in child psychology. So if any of you know someone, I have a lead that I'm going to follow up on right now. But yes, I'd love ideas for folks I could reach out to. Again, I'll make that public. The doctor reached out to districts, not yet. I'm putting my feelers out literally like within the past couple days. But I think this is a really important thing that needs to be addressed soon rather than later.
Could you put your email address in the chat box, Dr. Taylor, so folks can contact you directly? And then we'll make sure to share that too. So the best way to get information about all this is if you're interested in the Facebook event, you'll get notifications when the resources are posted. But also you can friend Johnny and I on Facebook. You can also like Ohio State Marion County Extension on Facebook. I'll put that link on there. And then Tina, we'll make sure too that, I know you don't have Facebook, that you get all this information as well.
Mm-hmm. And Hannah mentioned that social service organizations, AKA clinically licensed social workers, maybe they could be of assistance to Dr. Taylor. Is that right, Hannah? Okay. Okay, it looks like they're having some conversation. This is good. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to build community here. I always imagine it as Dr. Martin Luther King always said, trying to build that beloved community, like living out that type of idea that social justice works and always in relationship with one another. So yeah, I do want to mention that if there are certain topics or certain ways that you all would like us to go in our conversations, please let us know. We can let us know by our Facebooks or by email, because as you can see that this is holding space with one another. Our idea of turning to each other is quite open and quite emergent. So if we can emerge around dialogues, that'd be just as beautiful too.
If I could just make a comment.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of resources out just flying around right now, especially at Ohio State, around, keep learning at osu.edu, keep teaching at osu.edu, keep working at osu.edu. And these are great resources from a tactical and transactional standpoint, which is great. I so appreciate that you are making this a resource to be human. Rather than process things, and from an administrative. There aren't a lot of these happening right now. Especially, I think about my work world right now, and just the pace at which things are flying. This has been great to just kind of slow down, meet some new people, and think about what it is to feel kind of human right now. So thank you.
Thank you so much for saying that, Erica. Like that was really, that was our intention, but we don't always know the impact unless, people actually voice it. So thank you so much for telling us that.
Yeah, absolutely. That feels good to be affirmed and to know that this was helpful to everyone. Hannah made a really good suggestion. If you want to end in the chat box or unmute yourself with one thing that you're hopeful for or one thing that you learned, that would be really nice.
I guess I'll start. I'm hopeful in just being in community with all of you, and also learning and slowing down my learning type of thing. So I'm very hopeful for those pieces, just being in community.
What makes me hopeful is all of these like different ways of communicating with each other and creating community without actually being close to one another. So I started a book club, a virtual book club for my family. We tested out Zoom yesterday, which was challenging, but we made it there. So I'm very excited for our first official meeting next week.
Definitely. Well, good luck on your book club, Jenna. It seems like Thomas.1159 says, as a mental health professional, we are doing a lot of caring for others. It's nice to pay attention to myself for a moment. That is so true. To be able to check in with yourself and have a few people around you that are also checking in. Thank you for saying that, because as someone who does a lot of care work, I also sometimes forget, and Whitney and others remind me. The other day, Lizzie actually reminded me through a message that said, hey, make sure you're also taking care of yourself. So thank you for saying that, Thomas.1159.
I think what gives me hope is we're kind of living in 3 generations in my house. My grandparents are depression kids. So for them, they feel like they're reliving the depression. They want 10 extra cans of soup when they already have 50. And like, but also seeing them kind of come out of their shell and like learning more has been like really hopeful. We taught my 89-year-old grandma how to play life. So I think like kind of just building that community around you, but also like building that in your own house. I've seen so many of my friends actually get to sit down to dinner, which is like so foreign to so many people. And like I said earlier, the hope is that this will just kind of continue after this craziness is all over.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's helpful to me that these small connections that we're making, the fractals that Johnny referenced, that the connection that Dr. Taylor is bringing, and that you bring, Lizzie and Jenna and Erica and Patrice and Tina and Leslie and all of you. I hope that it can reverberate and that we can create something together. And I think that's what will sustain this work and sustain this belonging that we all feel as we do it together in small pieces. And as we change together, then we can move out and change more externally in our communities and our world. So I feel really hopeful and I feel really affirmed. So thank you all.
Definitely. And Tina says, I'm hopeful to be able to keep connecting with people and resources. So that's always good. It's always good, definitely. And Leo, Dr. Taylor says, I think many people are going to discover how easy it can be to stay connected and care for each other, even if we can't share physical space. Definitely, definitely. And Hannah says, I'm hopeful for connection in all of our different new and creative ways. Definitely. I know we only have a couple minutes left, and I just want to say, one is thank you to everyone that joined us today. May your journeys today kind of be ones full of care and joy, laughter and hope, and then also understand the despair that you feel is real, like affirming like that is real, and be in community with people if you can. in all types of magical ways and creative ways and physical ways that are socially distant, of course. What do you think, Whitney?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end. It goes back to what we're saying is love. Let's start with love and build our foundation there. So thank you all for the love today. As a technical aside, this was recorded, so I'll make sure that you have a copy, and as soon as it becomes available, please share with your network so we can do this fractal thing and build out.
Definitely.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good day from Wakanda. Bye-bye.